Greetings, it's me, Amber Nicole, your favorite diversity specialist. And this week we are studying internalized OPP or internalized oppression and privilege. So we will be discussing what that looks like in our everyday lives, the language around it, how it affects our affects our social systems and how we go about engaging with individuals and understanding, first of all, what internalized oppression is and internalized racism and internalized misogyny and such, and then how we go about moving the needle on changing the ideology around it and the way we think and identifying it so that we can make different choices in our everyday life and conversations. All right. Okay. There. So we'll get that turned in. Um, we are not having a affinity group. So
If you don't, here's your membership. Get out with O.P.P. Yeah, you know me. Get out with O.P.P. Yeah, you know me.
today is internalized OPP or internalized oppression and what that looks like. So we are going to define internalized oppression and internalized dominance. I'm going to examine the impact of that in our identities and then kind of review tools for disrupting or unlearning that programming. All right. So our touch points and touchstones, because if we're going to have a conversation, of course, we need to have our rules of engagement. So intent does not equal impact, means that we're going to acknowledge that we're going to allow for grace in the space, that even though you may mean something and you mean it as benign as Bruce Banner, that it may land on someone like the Hulk, that in this space, we're going to, one, allow for grace, and two, be mindful that it may be necessary for us to sit with, you know, what exactly has impacted us, that it doesn't make someone wrong or right, but that, we may need to figure out exactly why it impacted us the way it did. To use I statements, each and every one of us are multidimensional beings with various identities and belonging to various communities. And in this space, it is not necessary to speak for whole groups, populations, or identities that we are going to share, but we do so using I statements. To make space take space, this is a reminder that we are going to allow our extroverts to remember that we have introverts in the space and that we want to make sure that we share this time for those who may be a little loquacious like myself, and for our introverts, we are asking that you take space during this time. So make space take space. The Vegas twist, they say what happens in Vegas stays in Vegas unless
One of your bridesmaids.
unless you're one of my bridesmaids. Yes. But we are saying that what is said here stays here, and that what is learned here and what is felt here is what you take with you, that you won't share someone's lived experience without their permission, right? Don't yuck my yum is a reminder that to be mindful of our facial expressions, that if individuals are going to be vulnerable and transparent enough to share with us, that we're mindful of our facial expressions while they do so. And then to not defend our allyship. Again, we're going to assume that every single person on this call has been to every rally. We have done every protest. We have shown up and chained ourselves to every good deed possible. We've gotten in all the good trouble. So in this space, we're going to assume that we're all here for the same purpose and that it does not need to, we not need to defend our allyship. Windows and mirrors is what we're going to focus on here. Windows, or if someone is sharing a story about their life, or you are reading a book or listening to a story and you can't see yourself represented, you can't identify, you don't have context for that, then that's a window for you. And if someone is sharing a story about their life, or you're reading a book and you can see yourself reflected, then that is a mirror. That comes from the National Seed Project. And it's from Emily, I get her name wrong.
Styles.
Yes.
Style.
Styles.
Style.
Emily Styles. I'm going to find a mnemonic device for that. Who created that? So we'll be mindful of our windows and mirrors during this time. Remember, always by invitation, so you don't ever have to feel pressured to share. Just being mindful that, if you do pass, we may come back to you at the end because we get through this best with our shared collective experiences. Ow, sorry. And then to embrace the discomfort. Yes, that is often where the change is, or what lets us know that there is time for change, is when we experience discomfort. So to lean into that a little bit. So First, let's take a look at our circle of identities, right? So this is called the circle of identities, and it has race, gender identity. So I want you to think about your own personal identities in relation to these things. You can write them down if you like, but you think about your race, your gender identity, your sexual identity, your well-being, ecosystem, life, religion. These are all the, or a few of the parts, if you will, that make us the multi-dimensional beings that we are. And then this wheel is what I call the horrible game show of life. And it is called the wheel of oppression. And it has the various different types of oppression or systems of oppression that we can experience based on the various identities that we have, right? So whether that is our gender identity, as far as sexism, being a male is pretty much a privilege anywhere except for where Wonder Woman lives. Outside of that, it is definitely a privilege to be male on this not just this continent, but on this globe. Um, when we think about, I often think about monolingualism, um, simply with English being my first language and not even having to, well, I guess no, Ave is probably my first language, African American Vernacular English. Either way, I speak Ave and Standard American English. But when I think about going to presentations or engaging with individuals, I typically don't have to wonder whether it's going to be presented in a language that I can understand. That's a privilege, right? And so when we're thinking about just putting out information like at UAMS during the pandemic, I genuinely cannot imagine the horror of knowing that there is an invisible foe and everyone's putting out information in a language that you can't understand. Right? So that's what I think about when I think about monolingualism. Um, ageism. I feel like I'm in that weird in between space. Apparently, I'm not young people anymore, but I would like to think that I'm not, um, old people, but the older I get, the less old people seem old people, like, right? So, um, but there's this conversation, especially in the workplace, around millennials, and it's always millennials versus boomers instead of and boomers, right? Which makes me, of course, go to ageism because both of those ideas have their flaws, right? Um, any conversations or reflections on the wheel of the circle of identities or the horrible game show of life, the wheel of oppression, before we move forward? Anything that you'd like clarified from either of the wheels?
I just want to throw out there that I never thought about the privilege in everything being in English. And I'm going to use that as a conversation starter in those moments when talking to people about what do you mean by privilege,
Mm-hmm.
right? Because that's a good one.
Yeah. I think about things being in English, and additionally, I think about uh, religious privilege. I mean, more often than not, organizations get Good Friday off, but that's a Christian religion, right? That's a Christian holiday. We don't call them Christmas breaks anymore, but you don't get off for Yom Kippur. You don't get off for, you know what I mean? Like for Eid, you don't get off for, right, for the end of Ramadan. We don't get off for several other religious holidays. And I mean, we don't get off for the Festival of Lights. You know what I mean? Like there are all of these other religions, but as far as our calendar is concerned and our breaks are concerned, it's typically Christian holidays that we get off. And those who are Christian, that is a privilege that you didn't ask for those holidays to be off, but you simply get to have them, which is exactly what privilege is. It's a unasked for or unearned set of assets or privileges, like a societal benefit of the doubt. When I think about um, privilege, I think about, because more often than not, it's spoken to as though it means that you have, like, it has to do with social status or class, right? When it's not about those things at all. When I think about it, let's say we're talking about maternal mortality, right? In Arkansas, maternal mortality is, well, the numbers look horrific, honestly. We look like we are a third world country as it relates to the death of mothers, but even more so as it relates to Black women. Black women are 3 to 4 times more likely to die from maternal related complications than our white counterparts. So when I think about privilege, Katie didn't ask to be a white woman, right? She didn't ask to be in the group that dies less. She just happens to be in the group that dies less. And thus that's a privilege. Does that make sense? So, right. It's not about things that we've earned or established or gained. It just means that, these are things that we didn't ask for that we have. That's everything from K through 12 school. There are countries where they are not allowed to go to school. That is a privilege here in America that we simply get to go to school. K through 12th grade is a thing that you can do for free, right? In every state in America. So, now, forms of oppression, ideological oppression, institutional oppression, and then there is interpersonal oppression. So, excuse me. Pardon me. So, any oppressive system at its core has the idea that one group is somehow better than another. There are in groups and out groups, right? And this idea gets elaborated in many ways, whether that means that this group is more intelligent or harder working or stronger, more capable, more noble, more deserving, more advanced. The dominant group holds this idea about itself, right? So this is what we call internalized dominance. And the internalized oppression of that is when the group that is oppressed or marginalized or in the minority begins to also hold that same ideology about the other group, right? Um, this would be if we were to think about um, internalized internalized misogyny, right? Misogyny is the hate of women, and sexism, we know, it deals with discrimination based on sex. We often hear that women are more emotional, right? And it's said as though this is a bad thing, right? That women have, well, one, anger is an emotion, and we see men express it often, and we don't say that's emotionality, right? We don't call that being emotional, which is, we could label it very much so. But if women also were to think that women could not lead because they are emotional, that would most certainly be internalized oppression, right? For men to think that they should lead because they are less emotional, well, that would be internalized dominance, right? So this is simply when you have two groups and we've decided that one group is the in or the better group, and thus the traits of that group are what we should, what everyone should aspire to be like, which means that anyone outside of that group, right? If they begin to also have those same ideas, they have internalized that ideology or that oppression, right? Institutional oppression. This is when I think about hiring practices, right? And I think about what we determine to be professional, right? When you hear the word professionalism, these were standards that were created in the early days of the workforce management, and basically they were set on the standards of white males, right? So when we think about professionalism, we have these very rigid ideas of what professionalism is. But if someone told you that I am unable to be competent at my job with purple hair, blue nails, and I don't know, rainbow colored outfits, well, then that would be internalized oppression, right? That would be them playing into those same ideas. I am just as competent with my loud and colorful outfit, and it has absolutely nothing to do with professionalism, right? Professionalism has to do with the way I carry out and do my job. If my uniform is not actually a part of my job, then to make it such is an idea that has to do with oppression. And more often than not, those ideas institutionally come down on the Black, the brown, and individuals who do not fit into in groups, whether that is sexual orientation or any other marginalized population, right? And interpersonal oppression is when we do it one to another, right? This is when we, sometimes as women, determine what the idea of femininity should be like, right? When you determine that I'm not being feminine because I didn't shave my armpits, when femininity has absolutely nothing to do with my armpits, right? And more often than not, the ideas that we have regarding femininity and regarding what is feminine, what is soft, and what a woman should be comes from the ideas of the group of who is not in the group, which is people who don't have uteruses and vaginas. All right. So internalizing those, this is what happens when you see women voting against their own interest as it relates to even such things as bodily autonomy, right? Regardless of how you feel or where you come down as it relates to abortion in and of itself, the choice or the idea that someone should have access and be able to determine what they do with their own body is simply the idea of bodily autonomy. Determining that when we think about Arkansas specifically, women who have made the choice to have an elective termination, there's a 48-hour or is it 72-hour wait rule in Arkansas. That means if you go to the clinic, you get to talk to someone, but you have to wait 3 days because women need a little time to think about it. They may have come, but they need a little bit more time. And who came up with this rule? It was not women, right? Exactly. Men came up with this rule. Maybe if she waits 3 more days, she will then, change her mind because she didn't think about it before she actually went to the clinic, right? This is how it manifests in our policies, procedures, and actually in our culture. Hmm? So, internalized dominance is privileged. People involuntarily accept stereotypes and false assumptions about oppressed groups made by the dominant culture. Internalized privilege includes the acceptance of a belief in an inherent inferiority of the oppressed group as well as the inherent superiority or normalcy of one's own privileged group, right? It is when this is when Black people go into Black owned businesses and there's something wrong and they go, that's why I don't shop with Black people, right? As though you don't have bad customer service experience in predominantly white organizations, right? This is that idea that speaking that out loud is internalized oppression, okay? Um, Assuming that, but white men do not have to wait 3 days to purchase a gun. Additionally, white men do not have to wait 3 days to get a vasectomy. But that's a whole session on reproductive justice. It's a whole different course. Um, Most people in the dominant group are not conscious of or not consciously oppressive, right? They have internalized the negative messages about the other group, and it's not something that we even consciously think of all the time. In fact, understanding internalized racism and internalized sexism and internalized um, oppression is something that members of marginalized and historically excluded identities have to come to terms with because it can cause feelings of shame and embarrassment. And these are things that happen in our everyday lives. Our interpersonal communication is affected by internalized racism or internalized dominance or internalized oppression. You ever heard someone say, I mean, it's like they just raped me over this price. Yeah. So to simply say something as inflammatory as that you've been raped when you actually haven't been raped, not only is that traumatic and disrespectful, but it is the sheer disregard of the experience of not just women, but anyone who's experienced this. And that's what it looks like in our interpersonal communication, right? Um, when we, does anyone have any questions so far? I know I'm going kind of fast. I was trying to get this information in.
Will we get these slides?
Yes,
Awesome.
you'll get these
Thank
slides
you.
and this video. So,
Right. Thank
um,
you.
And then I will also give you last year's video of the longer session if you'd like to go back and look at it as well. So, but I didn't want to give it to you first because we have to talk about these things first before, so you have context. Those things that we talked about, they do play out in our practices and policies and laws. We reinforce these stereotypes when you think about the election of 2016. And we talked about the pantsuits that our women candidates were wearing, but no one talked about the pantsuits of our male candidates. This is internalized dominance and internalized oppression. If those same women played into the idea that they needed to wear dresses and other such things, right, in order to be more feminine, then that would be them internalizing that same oppression. Internalized oppression or internalized racism looks like, I think I may or may not have told you, the first time that I was going to wear locks on my campus, right? So the very first time that I was going to wear this hairstyle, which is called faux locks, on my campus, the night before, I had a whole breakdown, okay? Like, I literally sat in my floor and was like, you have lost your mind. Why did you get these locks? Like, you're gonna be looked at like some radical, like sister soldier, all of this. And then I was like, oh my gosh, that's internalized racism. This is a hairstyle that means something to me personally and spiritually in my culture. There is absolutely nothing wrong with wearing locks. And if I am viewed as being a radical for being a DEI advocate, then that's okay. But the apprehension, the sheer shame or the embarrassment that came over me first, that is most certainly internalized racism. All right. Um, assimilation is also what happens when there is internalized racism. This would be when you saw several members of the Black community perming their hair so that it looks more European, right? So that their hair looks straighter when they entered into the workplace, because wearing their naturally curly, puffy afro hair was not deemed as professional, right? By those who had internalized dominance, and thus internalized oppression allows us or causes us sometimes to assimilate. This is when you are seeing um, whitening cream, honestly, being the number one beauty product in Northern Asia, South Africa, and in several parts of South America. Because the lighter you are, the closer you are to beauty, which means that the oppression there they've internalized these standards of white supremacy, right? Whereas the internalized dominance means that you are able to say things like, oh, I'm getting darker and tanning just to look a little nice. But the idea is still that Black and brown people need to get lighter to be closer to beauty. Okay. Um, any questions on this part so far? Internalized racism also looks like conversations about um, Black on Black crime. That's not actually a thing. Black on Black crime is not actually a thing. You know why it's not? Because no one talks about Asian on Asian crime or Hispanic on Hispanic crime or white on white crime. It is only about Black on Black crime. And we will talk about what anti Blackness is a little bit more later on in the semester. But the conversation about crime or criminality is that most crimes are committed by people that people know, right? When it comes to violent crime, 80% of white people commit crimes against white people. Or wait, 80% crimes committed towards white people are committed by white people, right? And this is true with any other racial group or ethnicity. But we don't talk about the other groups because it is necessary to isolate and make it a pathology for this one group, which allows us to reinforce the ideas and the stereotypes centered around Blackness and criminality and other such, and deviant behavior and all the other things that play into anti Blackness, right? So I question you or I charge you to challenge when you hear certain things, right? When it comes to the news and other um and other media, people of color are shown in the news 7 times more in a negative fashion than their white counterparts, right? So, yes, if you're only watching the news, there are going to be reasons to say, oh, snap, these people are really, right? But if we were actually looking at these news stories and if people were reporting news stories in a very equitable and fair way, you would see that there is not one race or ethnicity that commits crime more than any other race, just like there's not one race or ethnicity that does drugs more than any other race. Everybody seems to get high at the same rate, apparently, according to the National Substance Abuse Association, right? So it's just being mindful to continue questioning what we think we know because our internalized dominance based on where you are, right? On that like on the wheel of identity, because it's going to you may be dominant in some spaces, right? And you may not, or you may not have privilege in others, right? Like it is a privilege that, when we're talking about English, for those of us who are English is our first language, that is a privilege. And that's something that we don't have to think about. But as we are all women on this call, we do understand what it means to simply experience oppression or to see unfair treatment and discrimination as it relates to um, being female in this country as well, right? So it is not oppression and dominance is not a stagnant situation. It's going to vary based upon identity and sometimes even based upon what is happening in the country at this time. All right. Second. Any questions so far? Hmm? So here is some examples of what it sounds like, because we always talk about labor being a language is a labor of love, right? And here is what internalized racism or internalized dominance sounds like in our everyday life as far as racism. Wow, you are so articulate. So this is for us to think about the intent versus the impact. This is something I've had said to me more often than not. But what wow, you're so articulate really articulates is that you are impressed that someone who looks like me is able to string sentences together, which in and of itself says that you feel that people who look like me are unable to be intelligent and to impress you, right? And you felt the need to say so. Um, I don't see color. We are all humans. Well, if you are not blind, then you do see color. And it is also necessary to see color. We're unable to fix the inequities that we have in our various social systems if we're not actually willing to see them, right? My kids would have a much easier time getting into college if they were minorities. Now, if that were true, this is about oh, this is about questioning where these come from, right? This is about questioning what this looks like and why someone would actually say this. That's not actually a true statement, and your students would not have an easier time. What people are speaking to are the fact that because things have been so inequitable, that institutions and organizations are looking at things such as other dimensions of diversity, such as race and sexual orientation and such, in order to make sure that they're trying to be as fair as possible in allowing people in. It does not mean that this minority has taken the slot of someone else. It simply means that there was a slot already allotted for this person or for this type of identity, and that there were several other slots for other identities, right? So no one took one of the 50 million slots that you were already allotted. They took one of the 1 out of 10 that were being allotted for their specific identity. All right. Classism. They're just taking the government's money. Well, this is when I think about or they just need to work harder. Well, one, what that says is that you feel or that you've internalized this idea that says in America that you can get everywhere you're trying to go and you can pull yourself up by your bootstraps, but that is not taking into consideration that sometimes people are making the best of bad choices because of their social determinants of health, right? their social determinant, like literally where they live as it relates to, even if you're just looking, I know that you're in different states and places in the US, but if we're just looking at Little Rock, in Little Rock, we work at UAMS. UAMS is the largest academic research institute or research center in the state, right? And it is located, or the main campus is located in central Arkansas in Little Rock. And it is located in a city that is literally divided by a freeway by race, right? The freeway was literally created to divide the city. Now, just a few years ago, 6 blocks that way from our institution, they closed 5 elementary schools. Those students didn't go anywhere. They didn't disappear, right? There's also no access to produce. There's no grocery store. There's no any of that in that area, right? So you've taken away the schools. There's no access to like actual healthy foods. And when you think about the lack of education, that means that there's going to be things such as crime, right? Poverty, crime, these things often go hand in hand. So as a, I don't know, 5-year old simply born into this situation, me being able to see and become something, there are times where we let the idea of the one think that that is the expectation for the many. Seeing one Obama who was able to do what he did and to reach the heights that he reached does not mean that every other little black boy who was born to a single mom in the projects of Chicago, Illinois is able to reach those same heights. That's not true. It means that there were barriers that he faced and was able to overcome, but there are several other Obamas still sitting in the south side of Chicago, unable to do those things and unable to reach their full potential because of these said barriers. Barriers that have absolutely nothing to do with choices that they've made and everything to do with simply being placed where they are in relation to health and academics, right? Um, 1 second. Cis sexism. This is this is comments such as, why do they have to have a parade? First of all, you're saying they. Um, so you are already othering someone more often than not when you hear they. Okay. They is already standing out as you're saying this, they are unlike me. So why do they have to have a parade? Well, in the event that you are able to understand what oppression looks like, if you are able to just pause and step outside of yourself when we are talking about our lesbian, gay, bisexual, trans, intersex, queer, um, um, I lost it. It
Two
went
spirit,
two spirited, um,
asexual.
asexual. That's what I'm looking for. Asexual. Thank you. Asexual population. Anything outside of being cis and heterosexual is going to be considered not in the in group, right? When we look at our holidays, when we look at our our policies, when we look at the fact that um, the average person doesn't even understand what it means to be asexual, right? Which means that those individuals, more often than not, probably don't feel included in everyday conversations. And you've probably unintentionally excluded those same individuals without even thinking about it, right? So, a parade where someone is saying, listen, my life, simply who I am, is a difficult thing sometimes. And not only is it difficult, but there are policies and laws in place that make it even more difficult for me to have the same access to information and resources as other individuals simply because I identify and or love differently than what someone else does. Then you would say, you know what, damn right they deserve a parade. And even if I don't agree, or even if I don't identify with this same group, I'm gonna go out and celebrate this parade with them because you have every right to have a parade. That's why there's a parade. The parade is simply it's a celebration of just that. It's a celebration of saying, you know what? You have absolutely no idea what I experience on a regular basis simply because of the way I identify, and I'm going to help you share. More often than not, People who act as though that's the only parade. If you want to have a parade for your identity, do so. But someone else having a parade doesn't hinder you from having a parade, nor does it harm your identity in any way, shape, or form. All right? Here we go. Ableism. um, you inspire me. So disabled people are not here for your inspiration and motivation. Okay. Um, and more often than not, if you just talk with them, they'll let you know that. These are individuals who live lives just like you do. And them waking up and putting their clothes on is not cause for celebration. You wake up and put your clothes on. Thinking about the barriers that they face, right? That is what equity looks like. But them simply identifying as who they are is not motivation for your inspiration. All right. Um, they go to college. They disabled people have jobs. We have project search in DDEI, and I have had several disabled interns, which makes me a better leader, right? And oftentimes we have to be mindful that disabilities look different than what you think they do, right? You can't see neurodivergent people, right? You are unable, if they don't let you know that they're neurodivergent, you will not know. So this is just a reminder to slow down, and that understanding that if you are an able-bodied individual, that there is going to be an internalized dominance more often than not, because you're not looking for ramps when you look for buildings. You're not worried about whether there are, whether there are elevators. And if you're walking with a group, simply because someone is walking with the group in that moment doesn't mean that they are able to take the steps if you decide to pivot and take the steps. So it's just being mindful of everyone in spaces where you are. All right. Um, okay.